So Susan Byrne is Canada researcher in collaborative digital scholarship and professor of English at the University of Guelph. She engages from an intersectional feminist perspective with the use of semantic technologies for cultural scholarship through the Orlando Project in Women's Literary History. Our critical infrastructure work explores now how online systems for creating, enhancing, and sharing cultural knowledge can advance collaborative knowledge production, diversity and inclusivity, respectful data creation and dissemination, sustainable access to cultural scholarship, and research data management and preservation. She directs the multi-institutional Canadian Writing Research Collaboratory, the CORE project, and the linked infrastructure for network cultural scholarship links. So I present Kim also. Both of you are, can I present
Sure.
Kim? Yeah?
It's,
Okay. So Kim Martin.
the biography's in the program. It's okay. I think it's fine. Yeah.
So Kim Martin is an assistant professor in history at the University of Guelph. In this position, she works to create community around digital humanities by organizing workshops, speaker series, and on events. She's also the associate director of the Humanities Interdisciplinary Collaboration Lab, a research space in the McLaughlin Library that provides space and expertise for graduate students and faculty working on digital interdisciplinary projects. So today they're talking about the LINKS project, Bridging the Research Heritage Collection Gap.
Thank you, Servan. And also thanks to Clarice and Jakob and everyone else who's brought this conference to life. It's been terrific. This conference has shown us that culture and scholarship are both increasingly operating as data. As the call for paper said, the question of how born digital heritage joins archival collections is hugely pressing and is underlies what I'm talking about here. GLAM, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, GLAM institutions create standardized, generalized metadata for their collections, whereas scholars tend to embed deep knowledge of items from those collections in their digital research. And we've heard about silos over and over again, the challenge of silos from so many different perspectives. And it's still, I think, arguably the biggest challenge. I mean, we have many, many challenges, obviously, but it's one of the biggest that faces us when we try to do research on cultural heritage. We never find everything we need in one place. So these sorts of data hardly touch these two sorts of data. They don't connect formally as machine-readable data. So I'm going to talk about what one project, LINKS, is doing to bridge that divide between research data and heritage collections, focusing on ontology choices and interfaces. And I do apologize for returning us to text here. It's a bit of a letdown after all the pretty pictures and videos. But as Scott said in his opening keynote, everything, properly speaking, is multimodal, properly understood. And I'm here precisely in the hopes that LINKS can build on what other folks are doing to incorporate annotations beyond text, and that we can all work together towards greater interoperability. And I have to leave right after the conference, I should say, but I'd be very happy to be in touch with anyone who wants to talk further later on. So the LINKS project, it stands for the Linked Infrastructure for Networked Cultural Scholarship, or l'Infrastructure numérique pour les données culturelles dans le web sémantique. We are an infrastructure project funded by the Canadian government, designed to promote the creation and use of linked open research data about culture. Basically, linked open data is really hard to do. The stack is hard to stand up for most scholars, and we're trying to fill a gap in the research ecosystem to make linked open data more accessible for experimentation and use in cultural heritage research. And we want to make the information environment more just to empower researchers in our fields and promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our core LINKS activities essentially are creating linked data. That usually means starting with a source data set, ingesting it into a linked data store, and then providing access to it both for refinement and for publication. it is not a platform. It is a suite of tools that are designed for creating and using linked open data, and we have a static website portal that gives you access to those and tutorials, documentation, and so on. It's a fairly complicated set of tools, so we have this navigational map based on the London Tube map to help guide people when it comes to figuring out what they need and what workflows they want to follow. And we really are about sort of bringing data sets together. So even, data sets that we have on the one hand, these big digitized archives of important cultural artifacts like Heresies, which is an important second wave feminist magazine out of New York City. Lynx has 2 projects that are related to Heresies. One is focused on the ads, and it's actually loading its data from IIIF servers so that it can isolate the ads. The other is the Heresies project that Diane is running out of Bucknell. So getting those 2 data sets to converge and ensuring that they're interoperable is part of what we're about, taking data from a wide range of domains. And these are very, very complementary perspectives. In fact, the 2 data sets hardly touch. Their methodologies are so separate, which is one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating about this kind of work. And now that Lynx is reaching the end of its development period and has more mature tools, we're partnering with memory institutions in Canada and researchers who want to work on that data to explore the possibilities of interlinking the research data and GLAM data. So we're doing that through the CDOC CRM ontology, which I think many of you know about already, and the web annotation data model, which underlies the IIIF standard, which we've been talking about throughout these last 2 days. CDOC CRM is increasingly used by cultural heritage organizations, whereas the web annotation data model offers a flexible W3C standard for linking resources across the web. So our approach is not that different from Europeana's approach. They also combine CDOC-based properties with web annotation data model in their annotations API. So we see these as quite complementary models. CDOC is the ontology of choice. It's very solid, robust, it's well engineered, and we want it because we want people to be able to experiment with inferencing, reasoning, shackle, and so on. So they need a really solid ontology for that, but it's also a challenge for researchers. It's really complicated. It's hard to model across different domains. You don't just get what you need clearly out of the box, so you need an ontology engineer to manage that. The web annotation model is a lot simpler to grasp in its structure, and because it can select a component of a web object for annotation, it provides a really great basis for detailed commentary on specific components of cultural objects, which is obviously very important to certain kinds of analysis and hermeneutics. And we've seen lots of that here with the work that's been presented. So now is the scary slide of how, and I'm not expecting everybody to be able to read this, but it basically outlines how we're combining the 2 models, not only to support commentary on a particular cultural heritage object, but to use the web annotations as a way of pointing to context for assertions about an object, like a named entity within a scholarly resource. So they have very different structures. Basically, the CDOC stuff is on the left of the slide, and the web annotation stuff is on the right of the slide. And you can see that we have to double the classes and the properties at points where we are bringing them together. So you'll see, most commonly that's has body and P67 refers to, but it means that we have here what is actually an assertion about, so the subject of what I would say in a subject-oriented sense as opposed to an event-oriented sense, oriented sense, the assertion here is that Marianne Shad Carey self-identifies as Black. And so there's the property way on the left. But it comes from a source in digital feminist literary history called the Orlando Project. And so the web annotation is pointing right back into the web page from which this assertion was extracted. And it's actually been extracted from XML markup in the source data. So we see this as, a form of annotating that assertion that allows you that context, which you can see in human readable form up in the top chunk of prose, which has been pulled from the source object. So our model does allow for more provenance than is shown here because we're taking in very different types of data sets. Some data sets support more granularity in terms of provenance than others. I loved Delphina's presentation earlier and really want to look at what we might be able to take from or maybe adopt wholesale that situated ontology, situated knowledge ontology, because we looked for something like that and earlier stages of the project and didn't find anything. So that was fabulous to see. And in this case, the target is a text, but of course, in web annotations, both your source and both your target and your body of your annotation can be any kind of object, right? Any kind of multimodal object. So we really would like to facilitate that. But for right now, what we're doing is largely focused on text, and I'm just going to talk about how we do that within 3 interfaces. The first is the research space interface, which some of you may have seen before. It was developed by the British Museum in partnership initially with Metafacts. And we have adapted this significantly so that it would better handle multiple data sets so we could translate the interface into French and deal with some of the challenges of the fact that we were dealing with quite diverse data sets, even though we're modeling them all with the same ontologies. So this data so if I just go back, this is one data set from the USask Art Gallery. And then Marianne Shad Carey, who you saw in the diagram earlier, she has her own sort of entity page, and that entity page has a page that summarizes what the most commonly used properties that we have about her are. You can create these things called knowledge maps, which are interactive ways of exploring the data structure, and you've got 4 entities there and their connections through a web annotation, but these can be expanded out into hundreds of cards. One of the things that really attracted us to Research Space as a platform is this semantic narrative functionality, where you can write a long-form argument and then you can embed entities or knowledge maps themselves into your argument, and as you update your data, these chunks of data actually update live in your semantic narrative so that you are keeping your narrative and your data in sync. So that's what we have in Research Space. And so here's how a web annotation works in our summary page for the entity. So this is, we have a number of assertions about Marianne Shad Carey's cultural identity, including the one that I modeled earlier. And that little snippet of prose that you saw can just be offered as a tooltip. So we don't just have the bald assertion that she is Black, but we're actually situating it in relation to the prose that goes with it. We don't agree that linked data triples are facts or factoids, as they've often been called. We see them as interpretations and assertions that need provenance and context to be evaluated in a research context. So in this case, the data model allows us to sort of pull that information in. And then this is how it works within a knowledge map. This models the web annotation here, and then that property of Blackness, if you like, links her to the other people within this data set who have been defined in the same way, so that you can trace from the annotation and its context to other people with similar cultural identities. And this is the kind of data that a lot of people shy away from because it's contentious, right? These sorts of labels are difficult, they are contested, they are very culturally specific, and yet we think this is if you want to do intersectional feminist research, you don't just ignore identities and sort of shove them to the side. But I've seen a lot of institutions, for instance, in their metadata want to move away from this, but we think this is at least the beginnings of a responsible way of doing that. So then that's Research Space, which we largely inherited. The Context Explorer is a browser plugin or extension for Chrome that we built ourselves to allow users to view links data about entities, matching those on a web page as long as it's visible. I've lost my place in my timer. I think I had about 18 minutes left. No, I didn't, obviously not. I'll just keep going fast. The browser plugin basically allows the links data to travel to where the user is rather than expecting the user to go to the data. So it is meant to try to provide context online to data that the user may not understand fully, rather than having to go and search for it, to show it in the context of the page where they have encountered it. And so I'm starting here on the Library and Archives Canada main site and going into their collection. I'm a researcher looking for connections between Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, and Canada. And I see a number of results here. Most of them are fairly standard, but the one at the top is a letter to someone named Mary Ann Shadd Cary, who I may not have heard about. I look in the metadata, I'm still not finding any other information. She has a fond, but when I go to that page, I don't find anything. And so I look at the letter, I decide I'm interested in it, but I really want to know who she is, so I can then click on the button in my toolbar, and now it's performing named entity recognition on the page and providing me with candidate matches for the entities that it has found. And once I hover on Mary Ann Shadd Cary, I can then select a match within links, and then it tells me, okay, I have connections to people, groups, places, and so on. I can open up a panel that gives me a little bit more information, and then I can start exploring those connections to see whether I'm interested in following any of them up. And so, these ones seem quite straightforward, but when I get into places, I say, okay, maybe a connection to somewhere in Canada, so here's a connection to Toronto, and we find that in connection with the anti-fugitive slave law, she ended up coming up to Canada, and that established her relationship with Canada, which was very important to the history of abolitionism. So the idea here is that we are really trying to take the data to where the user is rather than forcing the reverse. As you saw, I think, in Diane's presentation yesterday, we're also doing this in a semi-automated way out of the Leaf platform, so that anytime you're creating an annotation and you have annotations turned on in the LeafWriter tool that you saw Diane present, we can push those out as web annotations into links and make them available. So on the left you have a New Yorker article on Joanna Russ. On the right you have the document that Diane showed you yesterday, that gives some context to this sort of largely forgotten second wave feminist science fiction writer. Then we also have APIs. I'm not going to say much about them except that we're running all of this off of an API, and the idea, we weren't funded to do very much in the way of interface development, so we really hope that other people come along and find ways of using the data and the way that it's contextualized by our APIs effectively. And just to close, I would say, I really think that annotations are have tremendous potential to provide that link between cultural heritage resources in their own context that is on the institutional sites. and scholarship that is needed in order to situate them responsibly. I think these applications could be broadened or, extrapolated from in many ways, because they really they could be used to point to scholarly debates and secondary materials. They could be used in lots of different ways to sort of close the gap between the primary text objects or the primary objects in whatever form and the scholarship. We are going to be experimenting with using more automated extraction of annotations and seeing whether they could be used on large collections. Copyright collections are a big challenge for contemporary researchers, so you could use web annotations to point into collections without modifying the sources at all. I think it's a huge win for large cultural institutions who have these very complex, often quite fragile infrastructures that make it very hard for them to modify their data. So the beauty of all of this is that it's all standoff. It doesn't have to be it doesn't require changing the source data at all, and yet we can partner with those institutions in terms of how they want to see their collections contextualized. But I think there are really big challenges. I think one of the challenges that we've met, even with the relatively small amount of data that we have coming from different domains, is that it's really hard to take this kind of highly structured data and make it what Rob Sanderson calls loud, linked, open, usable data, because with an ontology like CDOC-CRM, the properties are really generic. So as soon as you get into domains, you're starting to deal with vocabularies, and getting everybody to converge on the same vocabulary is a real challenge. So there's a lot of challenges to usability, I think. So I just want to say in closing that I really appreciate this conference. I think it's extremely timely and important, and I hope we can talk further about the ways that we can work together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's very impressive. Do we have questions?
Okay, I have one question. Maybe it's stupid one. Yesterday we talked about open edition, and would it be interesting to have this kind also of links experience for scholarly edition in order to add context to these scientific publications?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the next stages that we're moving into is to build it out as a library rather than a plugin, so that if a site wants to run it, then it's not up to the user to know it exists and so on. It's already configured so that you can select what data sets you're drawing on if you trust some more than others or have specific interests. So yeah, I think it really has a lot of potential. The first time we demoed it actually in Montreal, Marcello said, I want to use that to annotate. That would be a great thing to do down the line as well, is to close that loop again and allow for either reconciliation, because we see, even in links, even though we've tried to reconcile the data, you always see, the duplicates and so on. So just being able to reconcile right on the spot, and also to be able to provide further annotations, would be great. And I think, because scholarship is all about dialogue, it does make perfect sense. Yeah.
Another question?
It might be slightly related, but thank you, Susan. I'm fascinated by the plugin, really, that allows you. And it made me think, though, as you said, and I asked this question about publish at the publishing end of things, where work becomes an output, and it sometimes ends up in journals that are rather standardly formatted and organized. So how does this kind of material, how does this way of learning things and structuring thinking and thought and research, kind of get into that space? So that would be one kind of question. The other might be about publics, because people like to read more. The ones who are interested in discovering more and reading more, and but they may not quite be able to handle some of the. I suppose, is there an easier user, slightly, an attempt to kind of open this up so that people would come and use it for their own reading experiences? So I suppose they're slightly related because they're both about communication.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I feel that the scholarly publishing world, the text legacy formats are so impoverished when you consider what digital textuality can do, that this is, an ongoing fascination of mine, and I think it does offer us ways of thinking outside the box in terms of what scholarly exchange would, that breaks away from those models would involve. I think there are real challenges around things like credit and citation that I think would have to be worked through. I agree that I think it's complicated as it is right now. It is probably worthwhile thinking about, could we get it down to something that is more streamlined and intuitive, that might have broader usage than what we're doing here, and that's a hard one. And I also think if it scales up, like, what do you do? I saw a wonderful paper about this a few years ago at the pre-COVID Digital Humanities Conference about those folks who will have millions of annotations associated with them. How do you then, bring to the fore not only the ones that are sort of trusted and valuable, but my interest is always in what about those outliers that we care about a lot, rather than where everything converges. Yeah.
Tricky.
Yeah. So I don't have any answers, but I think those are very good questions.
Complicated. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Is there a last question? So, yeah, Manuel.
Thanks, Suzanne, for the presentation. You started by explaining that web annotation were easier to manipulate or create, but in reality, it seems that expect hypothesis, there is no real platform where people can use open web annotation broadly and share annotation and bring them together. How do you think we can move forward in this direction?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, there's Pundit. There are other tools that are using it. It's the basis of IIIF, right? But it is, the silo problem just persists over and over. Yes, you can use it for hypothesis, but you're still storing all your stuff in one place. It's still not interoperating with other web annotations, et cetera. So I do not know. That's what I would really, I guess one of the things I was thinking in coming to this conference is, like, are there people who would be interested in seeing whether, if we're calling on our annotations from multiple stores, it's not that it's technically impossible, it's how do you handle the fact that we don't necessarily apply the model in exactly the same way, that we might be classing our entities differently, and then, it becomes a mess at the level of the interface. But I think we need to start trying, because it is a really simple model. It was developed by a very broad set of stakeholders from the scientific publishing community, from the researcher community, from the library and archives community, right? It was designed to, and trade publishers as well, who still haven't got annotation working in e-readers, right? So, pardon? Yeah. I think he's gone, but yeah.
You can go.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk about how we could work towards, overcoming this continued silo effect, even when we're using, the same data models, because it does seem to prove very difficult in practice. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So it's time for a coffee break, and I invite you to join us outside. Thank you.